Hello, welcome back to RP-0 America. So where we are now, let's see, we have an Atlas-Centaur vehicle. So this will be our first real launch with an RL-10. I did a previous test video just kind of showing off liquid hydrogen a bit and throwing it into a previous vehicle for a test. This will be our first real launch of them, and we're waiting on the tech which will allow me to launch Mercury capsules, which is really what I'm waiting for. I might throw something to Mars in that window, we'll see. We will definitely see. Since I can now build something with liquid hydrogen, I could throw something of a decent mass and a reasonable cost at Mars. At least I could try to. If the upper stage fails, it fails. But yeah, that's where we are in terms of the timeline, and it's the early 1960s. So we're not quite as far ahead as we used to be. We're definitely catching up to reality, or kind of matching a little bit closer than previously. And that'll continue to slip because I still need to design a Saturn I vehicle. I do, kind of want to test through that, and particularly because I will be using using Gemini for quite a bit of my craft, my human craft stuff. Then the Saturn I and the Saturn IB may actually be useful vehicles for me. All right, so here, to test out, to give our real first flight to, here you can see we have no data on these RL-10-3-1s, which are our, they are the liquid hydrogen engines we're using. So the Centaur has two. We have no experience with these. So this is just, there's no payload on this. This is just a nice sounding rocket. So test flight does allow you to, actually, I have to remember to look into sounding rocket contracts, but right now, I'm not too worried about cash, but this is definitely, would be an opportunity for me to grab some cash. Not sure quite why it won't let me lock SAS, but it's okay, I always use Smart ASS. Alright, so let's light up the first stage. So we've got this nice, reliable, at this point we've got a pretty, we're pretty happy with the Atlas launch vehicle, so we're using that as our first stage, and the engines have a good bit of reliability. They haven't maxed out yet, but they're, they're getting there. They're definitely getting there. They're moving steadily towards 10,000 data units. So let's just close that. So it's a really nice first stage for anything. It's the advantages of using an Atlas first stage for us are that you can really kind of tweak things by deciding when you drop off your boosters. And so for a heavier upper payload like this, particularly if you think about it compared to other Atlas launch vehicles, we've used like the Atlas-Agena, or other things like, say, Atlas with Mercury on top. This is a pretty heavy upper stage. It's something on the order of 15 tons. So that means that we don't have to be as cautious about burning this first stage for a long time. Like the fact that we can separate this and run just the sustainer engine with a higher ISP and a much lower thrust for a bit isn't quite as critical. So rather than, say, burning out at like 2 minutes 9 seconds or 2 minutes 11 seconds or so, separating, dropping off those additional engines, we can do things a little bit differently. We can actually retain that engine for a little longer, but really with a manual flight like I'm doing with this, partially also it's nice to retain that, so you can drop it off when you've decided, when you meet certain conditions, because my ascent curve that I'm following isn't going to be the same every time by any stretch of the imagination. So I can drop it off when I'm at a certain time to AP, or when we're at a certain orbital apoapsis. The one annoying thing about using the Atlas as your first stage and a half is that it makes it difficult to estimate how much delta V you're getting without doing some test flights, or loading up some Excel and trying to kind of do a mathematical simulation. Because the ISP and burn time are going to change drastically when we drop off the engine, and we can't very well tell MechJeb, I plan to drop off the booster engines at X amount of time when X amount of fuel is left, so you kind of have to note or simulate that. But I find that you have enough numbers, if you're learning how to fiddle with that, you'll have enough info if you just do a kind of quick test simulation like this. I should probably be a bit further down. That's okay. Let's see. How is the dynamic? By just noting down the masses at different times, noting down the mass when you drop off the engine, noting the mass at burnout, and noting down the masses and the times are really enough to kind of figure out specifically what changes you want to make in order to change. Oh, we're getting a really high lob here, so I'm going to drop off the engine a bit. Come on, drop off the engines a bit prematurely, earlier than I usually do, just because I didn't arc over nearly as much as I should have. And so that's okay, actually, since I'm kind of using it as a sounding rocket. Unfortunately, that won't make this a very good demonstration of how to actually fly this to orbit, to use this craft, but that's okay. As a sounding rocket, that's not necessarily what we're doing with this. We're not necessarily trying to just get this into orbit. That's not, this isn't going to ruin our mission by me lobbing it so badly. So let's just arc down even a little bit more. Let's see, we've still got the little verniers burning. Yep. So usually I would have waited, like in the quick test I did before this, I retained the booster engine until it said something like maybe 30 seconds or so of burn time left. Just burned it quite a bit of time because the mass that's remaining when you drop off those engines is so high because of this upper stage. It's not nearly as crucial in deciding when you drop off the booster engine at all. That's just really kind of gives you a way to control how much burn time you have remaining. Yeah, we're going to lob this pretty high, but that's okay. Like usually we're aiming really low. We're basically scraping the atmosphere. But in this case, we will not be doing that. We will not be scraping the atmosphere in our orbital path. It'll be a pretty high orbit, and even yeah, I think it will still be orbit, just because we have so much delta V. This number is a little inaccurate, actually. What if I change the order of these? So that's more accurate. How much delta V? And yeah, I suppose that's okay. I don't really need to hot stage the engines. I should probably also put on some little solid retros and things. They look cool, and now in these 64-bit versions of Kerbal, I don't have to worry too much about part count. Yeah, it's just, so this is the first. This is actually how the first liquid hydrogen engines were used by America. They were tested and launched on an Atlas vehicle as an Atlas-Centaur. Let me just quickly check what I was noting through. The LV-3C Centaur is what this represents. And actually, if you click, I actually grabbed the right tank for that even, which is pretty cool. First operational 1962, according to www.b14643.de. It's a German website with great information. And it used the engines, 2 engines on the Centaur here. So it's just a really great launch vehicle because at that time, 1962, this first stage, the Atlas, was a very reliable vehicle that used it for a ton of things. It was the go-to ICBM at the time, and for the following years. There we go. Drop that off. Light these stages. So you can also note that I haven't set this up to be relightable. So if I click the engines, you can see it's just great. There's super high efficiency engines. Compare that specific impulse to the first stage engines of the Atlas, or to even the other upper stages that I've been using. It's really good, and this number only gets better with newer versions of the RL10 and J2. But note, I haven't I haven't added little boosters to this to be able to relight it. I don't have anything to ullage the fuel, and this could certainly need ullaging. There are a couple parts that I will add to later rockets, but really this flight is just to get some reliability, because this is starting from literally no reliability at all on these engines. So, even though right now test flight is very forgiving, it just you get a failure randomly once in a while, which reminds you, oh, right, I do have test flight installed. Fair enough, those engines failed for me. Or, in this case, one of the engines could fail, or start delivering less thrust or less efficiency. But it's still good to build up a bit before you're doing a really critical, a crewed mission like I intend to build up some experience with engines, rather than the first flight you use with a brand new engine being a crucial one. So, which is why I'm kind of taking some time to think about how I design a Saturn I or Saturn IB, because with that. So the hydrogen engine was first tested out and utilized in a configuration like this with an Atlas and then a Centaur. So you can see I was about right actually with that upper stage mass. And note again, it has a pretty low thrust. thrust weight ratio at the beginning of this stage. It's because you could probably put 3 engines on this if you wanted to build an equivalent like this, or maybe use a bigger tank if you wanted, etc. You can make a custom version of this however you want. But the more engines you have, the more mass that you have on the stage that isn't fuel. So that means the less delta V you're going to get. So that's why vehicles like this often have, they feel underpowered when they first light. They have a very low thrust weight ratio. But really the first stage, first stage and a half of the Atlas, just lob this baby out of the atmosphere, or out of the vast majority of the atmosphere, which just gives you a lot of lead time to, it's lobbed, you've still got plenty of time to AP, and it gives you time to burn and increase your velocity and also get a better thrust weight ratio while you're really getting up to those high thrust weight ratios that you'll get with these as it burns through its load of fuel. Oh yeah, and it's still, so this stage actually has, if I zoom in with my face towards the screen, I believe there is a little more liquid hydrogen in there than liquid oxygen. I believe I mentioned that in the past video, that so amazing engines, just absolutely amazing. They've got very high efficiency, they're relightable. One trick is that the liquid hydrogen is very volatile. It will boil off. So if I wanted to, let's say, send something to geostationary orbit, so in practice that means I would try to get a circular, I would just try to get into basic orbit, and then I would be waiting for a certain time, and just from experience I know that it's roughly down here along the path. I guess I'm not in orbit yet, so I can't move the mouse over the path, but somewhere down here where I want to do my burn around when I'm over the equator. I don't think I've done a geostationary launch video. In the comments, let me know if that's something people are really having trouble. It's a problem people are really having trouble solving, because there's a couple of steps past what I've already done to get something into geostationary orbit, particularly launching it from a place like from Florida here, that has substantial inclination. But the first step would be getting into a low orbit. See, right now I can just fly it looking at these numbers. There we go. Get into just a low orbit and shut down the engines, and then kind of coast the stage until you're over the equator, and then burn again, so that there you have your distant point, which for geostationary orbit is about 36,000 kilometers, and you want that point to be also over the equator, just much further out, and the low point to be over the equator here. So AP way out at 36,000 kilometers away from the Earth, but still just over the equator, and the low point, the periapsis, also over the equator at the low point here. And then either, usually it's not this stage, this like the core upper stage that's used, but once your craft has coasted out to that 36,000 kilometer distant, it will do 2 maneuvers at the same time. So one is to burn forward to bring up the periapsis also to 36,000 kilometers, and simultaneously you angle the craft such that you cancel out the inclination you have, so that you're truly right over the equator and you're in that actual, that true geostationary orbit. But yeah, if that's the kind of mission people really want to see, I can do that. I've done it before. I don't find geostationary orbit particularly interesting, but it is like just to being there in general, because I don't play with remote tech, so I don't try to set up a a communication satellite network. But it is certainly an interesting challenge to solve. I find it's about as challenging as landing something on the moon or hitting precision orbits around the moon, and actually requires similar amounts of delta V. So like I found once I had kind of honed my skills at getting an object from Florida to geostationary orbit, that very same type of craft was very useful for all kinds of medium weight moon missions. So we are approaching orbit here now. Let me just pull up how long are we here? So we're approaching 15 minutes. Sorry I didn't warp through anything, but it's taking it slow getting back into recording videos, as I've been rather busy. Okay, let's angle this down here a bit. I'm just kind of watching this time to AP, and so it's still increasing. So note I've still got a pretty good amount of delta V in here. Not quite enough to throw something at the moon, but if I had a lighter payload, right now I just have a dummy payload, I could definitely throw something at the moon, because I would just need to leave about 3,100 or 3,300 meters per second in the tanks. There we go. Let's just level this off. And so we're going to achieve a nice, not terribly low orbit. We're actually fairly out of the atmosphere. So this could actually stay up for months in reality, in practice. This would be an altitude. Whereas usually we kind of have one of our points around 150 kilometers. And with an altitude like that, you'd only be able to stay up for, for a few days. It's generally thought of as a parking orbit. It's not a practical orbit for your payload, but it's an orbit where you can just kind of stay there for a while. So we've got some excess liquid hydrogen here, and so let me, with this test craft, it was nice and successful, so let me coast a bit. So I'm probably not going to be able to relight these engines just because now I don't have a way to stabilize the fuel. So let me just pop this off, and you can see the little dummy payload I used here. Just a, I thought that tank should have some mass. I'll have to look into that. I thought I added some lead or something to it, but it's been a while since I built that craft. And, a battery and just, something so I could get this MechJeb specs out of it. And the fuel is still stable. So I might, the thing that I want to show is, so here you can see the liquid hydrogen is boiling. So that's what this number means. So it's losing 0.03 liters per second. So what does that mean? It would take about 30 seconds or so to lose a liter. And it takes about 90 minutes to come around the Earth. So and see it's starting to increase, and I think that's because these engines are warm, and so the heat is migrating from these engines up into the tank here. And so as this warms, it's going to cause more. Here, let me illustrate that. I think the boil off is the thing I'd like to show rather than the relight. You can trust me that this would relight if I did it now. I mean, it's pretty trivial. But here, let's see. So to get a bit of insight into the boil off problem. So now I've set up a thermal menu here, so you can see what is the temperature of the tanks. So if you look it up, liquid hydrogen boils at a very low temperature. So with temperatures like this, and I think you can see them going up. They're probably taking on energy, heat from other parts, perhaps. Let's see, this part is going to be a bit warmer than it. So this whole the temperature of this whole craft has to stabilize, and here you can see so skin to internal. So temperature, because the skin temperature is higher than the internal tank temperature, these are equalizing. And the thing that's cooling, so the sun is beating down on it, which is warming it up. It's a balloon tank. So one thing that makes the Centaur so great is that it has a really light mass tank, just like the Atlas did, which is why they're a really interesting vehicle pairing, I find. So this is a very light tank when it's dry, and part of that is that it doesn't really have insulation because its intended use is to kind of use up all of this fuel in one burn, or just do a fairly short coast in order to do the next burn. Like in practice, it would, now that we're up here, it would take us, it wouldn't be very long. Like literally, all this stage has to do is get us to orbit. Well, it does amazing things, but in terms of insulation, it has to survive up to orbit, which took all of 14 minutes or less, and then it has to coast again for roughly that amount of time until we would do another burn. So it just has to stay in orbit for 15 minutes or so. And with a design like this, it is really crucial that you design it so your coast time isn't going to be very long, because you're going to be burning off, you're going to be losing this liquid hydrogen, because the only thing that's keeping these temperatures down is the fact that the liquid hydrogen is boiling. Just like imagine ice melting in your glass. When the ice melts, it keeps the water cool. So as this boils off, it's trying to keep this vehicle cool, and that's what kind of is stalling, keeping this boil off from increasing faster, is that the liquid hydrogen is actually being lost, and the cooling potential of the liquid hydrogen vaporizing imparts some cooling to the rest of the fuel and structure that remain. And it isn't, at least in my experience, it isn't perfect in Realism Overhaul. Obviously you'd want to stop that boil off if you wanted to have a vessel that could coast for longer, or if you wanted to make a fuel depot. Like, let's say you're like me and you're imagining making a giant vehicle to send humans to Mars, right? Or even for a flyby, or Mars or Venus. So you're going to need a very large craft. So it would be nice to be able to send a few smaller craft into orbit with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and kind of keep a fuel depot up there and send up more fuel over time to build up your large craft. But if I'm saying, well, I guess we can survive 15 minutes. So here, so kind of, mentally note those numbers or note them down. That's the thing I love about YouTube videos. You can just go back and look. So note how much we have there, and now, and also delta V, once we coast to our point here. So notice we're not losing delta V, really. It's actually increasing, because the Centaur was designed with this in mind, that they knew the liquid hydrogen would boil, so they made the liquid hydrogen tank a little larger than the perfect fuel mix, which makes it a bit hard for you if you're building with this with procedural tanks. If you just go and click, boom, the perfect burning ratio for liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, you're actually going to not have this excess liquid hydrogen, and you definitely want at least a few dozen or 100 liters of excess liquid hydrogen for the boil off for that coast. Yeah, so we actually gained a little bit of delta V, but here, let me coast this through just to illustrate. So see, we're gaining delta V because this liquid hydrogen was excess. So we were actually able to get one whole orbit of coast, and we're coming around again here. This makes me just a little dizzy. Let me just click on the Earth so we can see it coming around again. So we're making it to, let's see, 2 orbits worth of coast, and that's going to be about it. Now you can see, oh, okay, so it's still going to keep increasing. Only a little more, so 3 orbits worth of coast. Oh, can't go faster than that, fair enough. But at some point, there we go. All right, so we made it 3 or 4, about 4 orbits of coast, which is pretty great. Oh yeah, 8 hours, sure, that math probably makes sense. So that's quite a bit. So that's, with this vehicle, the FASA Centaur tank, that's about as much as you could possibly coast before you're gonna get below the ideal burning ratio. So now, if we'd be, we can relight them, but I'm not going to. I'm pretty sure that's, so you're getting a little bit of G-force here, because the way Nathan Kell has modeled it, when the fuels are boiling off, they're producing, I think it was actually done this way, which was quite clever, that the gases from these boiling fuels is vented out to provide a little bit of forward ullage thrust, which helps to stabilize the fuel. And so I think if it boils off in time warp or some things like that, it kind of has to catch up, which gives you a little thrust forward, which can ullage your fuel. But it's smart to, this Centaur tank also comes with high test peroxide, so it's smart and makes sense to include little jets here that burn HTP in order to give you the ullage to make sure that you can settle the fuel in this. Let's see, I think that's about it. I've talked about a ton of different things. In practice, I found that things in Realism Overhaul aren't perfectly balanced to be able to, like, you can procedurally make a tank that has better insulation, so you could get a longer coast. But in practice, the radiators I have a bit of trouble with, because ideally you'd be able to design radiators, say, to add to a craft specifically to keep, say, like the liquid oxygen from boiling off. If the only cryogenic fuel it had was liquid oxygen, or you'd have a different type of design of radiator you would use to be able to stop the boil off of liquid hydrogen. And I don't think we currently don't really have those spec'd or in the tech tree for Realism Overhaul. But because that kind of is coming into demand for me and other people now, is a really good sign for how Realism Overhaul and RP-0 have progressed. At least that's what I believe, because now we've got this early tech tree so nicely tuned and fleshed out. I find it, it's certainly not perfect, but it's way better with all the work people have put in over the last year or two now. Where, okay, well, now that we kind of want some end game features, like what do we do with technology once we've completed like Apollo level missions? Once you've everything's nice such that you can have missions to put people onto the surface of the moon and return them safely to Earth. Okay, well, what do you do after that? What technology post 1969 can we do? What mission ideas can we do? And one of those is to have like a large fuel depot, or a way to bring fuel into like liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen into low Earth orbit for weeks or months, where you and not lose too much to boil off, so you can build up a large amount of those fuels to send a very large mission to Mars or Venus or other things. But yeah, that's kind of another introduction to liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. We have gained some experience with these engines, so they will be much more reliable next time we use them. And so I'll have to think up a payload to use on the Atlas-Centaur vehicle here, perhaps a mission to Mars, since that window is approaching. I'll have to remind myself what things we've already done. You know, have we put something into orbit of Mars already? If not, then that would be a great mission for me to do, and I could illustrate, I could build perhaps a larger payload to throw to Mars, with the extra potential that this great Atlas-Centaur stage, or sorry, this upper stage Centaur has. This will, because it has higher efficiency engines, it'll allow us to put more mass into low Earth orbit and throw more mass at Mars as well. And if I have placed something in Mars orbit and I've forgotten, then perhaps I'll look into designing a rudimentary vehicle for making the descent to the Martian surface. Probably not something robust enough that it will survive, because honestly, I don't think I've ever successfully done that. I've tried to design much more ambitious things to land on Mars, but not like a basic thing to like where I've actually carried out the mission all the way from KSC launch all the way up to the actual surface of Mars. Let's see, let's just get another sunrise here. There we go. So where are we now? My guess would be, randomly I imagine, California. Is this California? No, I don't think so. No, definitely not California. We are over somewhere in Asia. All right. I'm just so used to seeing California appear, because it's one of the few things I can recognize. And of course, clearly I can't recognize it if I confused this with California. Yeah, thanks for watching RP-0. Yeah, it's good to be back, make videos. Just being rather busy, and I've kind of sketched out what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to make a real payload with this, to send a payload towards Mars, or make some practical use of the Atlas-Centaur. Maybe throw a larger probe to the moon, because that's probably a little easier. But yeah, I just need to come up with a practical payload for this, because I've got about 300 days until we have the technology to put Gemini astronauts into low Earth orbit, which I think the Gemini program, coupled with using liquid hydrogen like this, is going to be really fun. And I also need to design a Saturn I vehicle, with possible using a Centaur as an upper stage, or actually design a S-1V, the S4, like an S4 stage, which was used on the actual Saturn I, which had 6 of these engines, which is amazing to me. They went from the Centaur like this, where they just did a proof of concept of liquid hydrogen technologies, up, and then they designed a whole new stage to test, to really test how you can scale up these tanks and these stages. But they still just had this engine, so they had to use 6 of them on that upper stage. And I find that as a really interesting vehicle that I'd like to think of, to have actual missions with Gemini to use that. I might, or I just might jump to the S1B, which uses a J2 engine instead of a bunch of RL10s. Yeah, thanks for watching RP0 America. Goodbye.